My girlfriend and I took a long weekend a few years back, renting a small single-story stucco house about 2 hours outside of Phoenix. We just wanted a break from work and a chance to do some hiking around the desert trails nearby. The house was standard for the area. A gravel driveway, a little covered patio out front, tile floors, and an older gas stove in the kitchen. Friday was totally quiet. We stopped for groceries, cooked some dinner, and watched a movie. Saturday was pretty much the same. We spent the day out on a trail, came back, made some tacos, and were just relaxing. Nothing felt off. There were a few other houses visible down the road, but it was generally a quiet neighborhood after dark. Around 10:30 Saturday night, we were winding down. I was putting a few glasses in the sink when there were 3 quick, firm knocks at the front door. It surprised both of us because of how late it was. I walked over and looked through the window. A man was standing on the porch wearing a high-visibility utility-style vest, holding a clipboard and some kind of handheld electronic detector with a small digital screen. I opened the door a crack. He looked a bit rushed and explained that he was with the regional utility service. He said they had a report of a possible natural gas leak nearby and were checking the lines of all the properties in the immediate service area. He asked if we'd noticed a sulfur-like odor or if we had experienced any sudden headaches or dizziness. We hadn't, but he explained that a lack of symptoms didn't necessarily rule out a problem, and they needed to verify the indoor gas connections to ensure the line was safe. My girlfriend came up behind me and asked to see his identification. The man reached down and flipped over a laminated identification badge hanging from a lanyard. Under the yellowish porch light, I could see a photograph, a printed name, a logo, and an employee number. It looked entirely official. I remember feeling a slight flash of embarrassment that she'd delayed him during what sounded like an emergency. I stepped back and let him inside. The inspection was completely mundane. He walked into the kitchen, asked where the gas appliances were located, and crouched down by the wall. He held the electronic device near the baseboard and pressed a couple of buttons. It gave off a flat, digital chirp every few seconds. He asked if we'd used the stove recently, and I told him we'd made dinner a few hours ago. He nodded, wrote something down on his clipboard, and then asked where the water heater or utility closet was located. I pointed down the rear hallway toward the narrow utility closet near the bathroom. He walked back there, opened the slatted door, and started checking the pipes. My girlfriend went back to the living room couch, and I stayed by the kitchen counter, just waiting for him to finish. He was back there for a while, probably 4 or 5 minutes. Every now and then, I'd hear the detector chirp, or the sound of his clipboard clicking. Finally, he stepped out of the hallway. He looked at me and said he needed to check the airflow, or a vent inside the bedroom. That was the first time I hesitated. I simply didn't want a stranger entering the bedroom where our bags and personal belongings were located. I told him we'd rather he didn't go in the room, but offered to look at the vent myself if he could explain what needed to be checked. The man stopped. He looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything. The pause lasted just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then he just nodded, muttered, "All right," and clipped his pen back onto the board. He turned and started walking back toward the front door. I figured the awkward interaction was ending and walked behind him to lock up. My girlfriend's purse was sitting right there on the kitchen counter next to the entryway. As the man passed it, his hand reached out and grabbed the straps, picking it up in one smooth, casual motion, like he was just collecting his own gear before leaving. My brain didn't register it for a second. I just stood there and said, "Hey, that's hers." He didn't stop walking. I reacted physically and grabbed the heavy material of his utility vest to pull him back. He spun around incredibly fast. The side of my face took a massive, heavy impact. I didn't even see it coming, but the plastic casing of the handheld detector smashed right into my jaw, sending me sideways into the counter and down onto the tile floor. Everything went chaotic. My girlfriend started yelling, and I heard her scrambling for her phone, frantically shouting our location to a 911 dispatcher. I tried to push myself up to keep him from leaving, but as I got to my feet, I saw movement from his other hand. He was holding a small retractable utility knife. He sliced it through the air toward me. I instinctively threw my left forearm up to protect my face. I felt a sharp, hot, pulling sensation across my skin, but the adrenaline was rushing so hard, I didn't realize I was cut until I saw the dark stains spreading across my sleeve a second later. Right then, my girlfriend threw a heavy ceramic table lamp from the living room. It missed him, shattering loudly against the doorframe, but the man flinched and turned sharply toward the sound. He dropped the purse onto the floor, turned, and bolted out the front door into the dark. I didn't pursue him outside. I stayed on the floor, pressing a kitchen dish towel tightly against my arm while my girlfriend stayed on the line with the police. We heard a car engine start up down the road and the sound of tires moving across gravel, but we couldn't see the vehicle. The wait for the police felt endless. My jaw was throbbing, the towel was quickly soaking through with blood, and I realized I was still sitting on the tile floor. My girlfriend repeatedly looked toward the front window and checked the door lock. When the officers arrived, everything was strictly professional. They took our descriptions, filed a report, and called an ambulance to look at my arm. The cut wasn't deep enough to hit anything vital, but it needed a thorough cleaning and a row of stitches at the local clinic. I still have a thick, pale scar running across the top of my forearm. The next day, the property owner and the police contacted the utility company. The findings were brief. No crews had been sent to that address, and there had never been a gas leak reported in the area that night. The man was never identified. We never learned exactly why he wanted access to the bedroom, or if robbery was his only motive. For a long time afterward, I kept replaying those first 2 minutes on the porch. I kept focusing on the vest, the clipboard and the badge, thinking about how easily a few props could trick someone. But the more I think about it, the more I realize it wasn't the disguise that got him through the door. It was the specific lie he chose. I never smelled gas that night. Neither of us felt sick, but none of those observations felt sufficient at the time to safely dismiss someone claiming there might be a dangerous household problem. If someone had arrived late at night, claiming there was a problem with the internet or television service, I would have told him to return another day. Gas felt different. Even now, years later, an unexpected knock at the door gives me a sudden physical reaction before I can even think. The 3 quick hits against the wood always bring me right back to that rental house. But my clearest recurring memory isn't the knife, it isn't the scar on my arm. I just remember the inside doorknob. I remember turning it. I remember pulling the door wider and taking a single step backward because he had that clipboard against his chest and I thought he needed the room. He never had to break in. I moved out of his way. 5 of us took a weekend trip to a coastal rental house for my friend Dana's bachelorette. We wanted something low-key and close to the beach. The place was a standard raised beach house with weathered siding and a narrow gravel driveway. We spent Friday night unpacking, fighting over the one good mirror, and putting up cheap decorations. Saturday was just as ordinary. We got coffee, walked around town, and spent a few hours on the beach before getting ready for dinner. We went to a seafood place about 10 minutes away. Right around the time our food came, Dana's phone buzzed with a message through the rental app from a stranger. It just said, "I'm supposed to be at that property this weekend. I need you to call me." We thought it was a scam. Dana checked the app. The booking was perfectly fine. The dates were right, and the keypad code worked. She messaged the host, but we didn't wait for an answer and just finished dinner. We got back to the house around 10. A dark sedan was parked at a weird angle across the bottom of the driveway, forcing us to park on the shoulder. As we walked up, a guy stepped out from the shadow of the porch stairs. He looked ordinary, just a guy in jeans and a jacket, but he walked right up and asked if one of us was Dana. He said he'd booked the house for the weekend, and that his reservation had been cancelled a few days ago, over a billing error. He held up his phone to show an old confirmation email. I looked over Dana's shoulder and saw the exact address and photos of the house. Dana tried to explain our booking was active, and she dialed the host right there, but it went straight to voicemail. The guy was getting restless. Dana said, "Look, I'm trying to reach the host, or we can call support." The guy didn't look at the phone. He just said, "You need to get your things out." He started moving toward the stairs. Priya moved to block the bottom step, telling him to hold on, but he didn't stop. He shoved his forearm straight into her chest, throwing her hard against the wooden railing. We grabbed Priya and rushed up the stairs. I reached the door first and started pulling it shut, but he caught up instantly, shoving his shoulder and foot into the gap. I threw my entire weight against the wood, the edge pressing into my palm, but the deadbolt wouldn't line up. He managed to get his right arm completely through the opening. Out of nowhere, Dana grabbed the small fire extinguisher mounted just inside the kitchen door and swung it down hard onto his forearm. He pulled back with a sharp cry. I slammed the door, yanked it until it clicked, and threw the deadbolt. The whole frame shuddered as he hit the door twice from the outside. Priya called 911, her hands shaking so hard she kept misreading the address off her phone. I looked out the window and saw him walk back to his car, lean deep into the back seat and pull something out. Dana grabbed us and pulled us down the hall, into the small back bathroom. It was the only room with a lock and no windows, all 5 of us crammed inside. I remember sitting on the floor by the vanity, noticing Priya's arm swelling where she hit the railing, and Dana still wearing only one earring. We stayed completely silent, listening to the porch boards creak outside as he paced and muttered. The siren started. About 6 minutes later, we stayed locked in until the police knocked and identified themselves. They picked him up 2 streets over, walking down the sidewalk holding a tire iron he'd taken from his trunk. His reservation had been cancelled 3 days prior over a payment dispute, and he'd just driven down anyway. We spent the night in a hotel. A few months later, my sister asked me for the name of a cabin I'd stayed at a few years earlier. I searched my email for the town and found the old booking confirmation. The trip had been 3 years ago. I opened the email expecting to find the property name. The full street address was still there, so were the old check-in instructions. I sat there looking at it for a while. I hadn't thought about that cabin in years, but once I saw the address, I could picture the road leading up to it. I remembered which way the driveway curved and where we had parked. I could have driven back there. I deleted the email. For about a second, that made me feel better. Then I realized I could still picture the driveway. The reservation was gone. The address wasn't. A few years ago, my girlfriend and I rented a small, single-story stucco house about 2 hours outside of Phoenix for a long weekend. It was a simple trip to get away from work and do some hiking. The place had a gravel driveway, tile floors, and looked like every other desert property in the area. Friday and most of Saturday were completely uneventful. We bought groceries, cooked, went for a drive, and watched some TV. Nothing strange happened at all. Around 10:30 Saturday night, we were winding down in the living room when 3 quick, firm knocks hit the front door. It caught us off guard because the road outside was dead quiet. I walked over and looked through the window. A man was standing under the porch light, wearing a high-visibility utility vest, holding a clipboard and a handheld electronic detector. When I opened the door, he told me he was with the regional gas service. He said a leak had been reported nearby and he needed to check the appliances on our line. He asked if we had noticed a sulfur smell or experienced any headaches. We hadn't, but he explained that didn't mean the property was safe. My girlfriend naturally asked for identification. The man pulled up a laminated badge with a photo and a company logo. In the dim porch lighting, it looked entirely genuine. I actually felt a brief flash of embarrassment that we were delaying him during an emergency. I stepped back and let him inside. He went straight to the kitchen, behaving exactly like a technician. He crouched by the older gas stove, running his detector along the baseboards while the device emitted a few ordinary electronic chirps. He asked when we had last used the burners and checked under the sink. The conversation was boring and completely routine. Then he asked where the water heater was. I pointed him down the rear hallway. He opened the utility closet near our bedroom and stayed in there for several minutes. We went back to relaxing in the living room, occasionally hearing the device chirp. When he finally stepped out, he casually mentioned needing to check a vent inside the bedroom. I hesitated, I didn't want a stranger going into our private space, so I told him we'd rather he didn't go in there, but offered to look at the vent myself. The man stopped. He looked at me for a second too long, then simply said, "All right," and started walking toward the front door. I thought the awkward moment was over. My girlfriend's purse was resting on the kitchen counter near the entryway. As the man passed it, he reached out and picked it up in one fluid, casual motion, like he was gathering his own things. My brain stalled for a second before I managed to say, "Hey, that's hers." I lunged and grabbed the back of his vest. He whipped around instantly. A sudden, heavy impact smashed across my jaw, the handheld detector, and I hit the floor. Through the confusion, I heard my girlfriend frantically screaming into her phone, "To 911. I tried to stand, but the man stepped toward me, and I caught the glint of a small retractable utility blade in his hand. He swiped it downward. I instinctively raised my forearm, feeling a hot, sharp pulling sensation across my skin. Before he could strike again, a heavy table lamp flew across the room, shattering against the wall right next to him. My girlfriend had thrown it. The sudden crash startled the man. He dropped the purse, turned, and bolted out the front door. We stayed inside. I pressed a dish towel against my arm as blood soaked through it, while we heard a vehicle rev its engine and speed away in the dark. The police arrived a short time later. The wound required a dozen stitches, leaving a permanent scar. When the officers contacted the utility provider, they confirmed that no technicians had been dispatched and no neighborhood gas leak had occurred. The man was never identified. Years later, unexpected knocks still trigger a physical stress response before my brain can process it. For a long time afterward, unexpected knocks made my whole body tense before I even understood why. Even now, 3 quick hits against a door can put me right back in that house. I spent a lot of time thinking about the vest and the badge. I wondered if the detector was real, or if he'd bought some random electronic tool and learned which buttons made it chirp. I wondered how many times he'd practiced the explanation he gave us on the porch. I don't really think about those things anymore. I never smelled gas that night. Neither of us felt sick. We'd used the stove earlier and nothing unusual had happened. But standing at the door, none of that felt like enough reason to send him away when he was telling me there might be something dangerous in the house. The clearest thing I remember is the inside doorknob. I remember turning it. I remember pulling the door wider, and I remember taking one step backward because he had the clipboard pressed against his chest, and I thought he needed room to get past me. He never had to break in. I moved out of his way,